Zoey 101 was one of my favorite shows when I was growing up, and I'm not ashamed to say it. They sucked me in with a pilot episode featuring basketball, and from there they had more or less attractive people who they put on screen and threw a whole bunch of comedy in there. But now that I'm an adult, and I am married with children, my analytical mind has continued to wonder, what was I actually watching? And one episode in particular has always stood out to me. It's called Girls Will Be Boys from season 2. Now, back when we were in the cable era, things just kind of happen. You see it, there's some commercials in there, 30 minutes, and then it's gone. It's not like you can just watch it whenever you want. But because Paramount Plus decided to make their subscription $2.99 on their, Black Friday deal, I hopped in and I went back to watch that episode, and I have some thoughts. Because Nickelodeon definitely tried it with this episode. And I know, thanks to the documentary The Orange Years, that the network basically operated by the principle that parents don't really know what their kids are watching, so just give the kids what you think they might want to watch, regardless of how they feel about it. This episode 100% fits in that category, and although it didn't get banned when the episode hit the air, at the very least, there would have been a whole lot more controversy if people actually saw what the episode was about. So I'm just going to break it all down, again, with my analytical mind, and I'm going to go scene for scene, almost line for line, breaking down what were we watching and why does it matter. In full disclosure, I am a Christian man, so I am going to be looking at all of this from that framework. So here we go. The episode begins with a wide shot of Pacific Coast Academy, and then we shift to a scene where we see Zoey, Nicole, and Lola where they are suntanning. They're actually, in their bathing suits, and we don't really know where they're located. They're talking about homework and who has more work to do, but fundamentally speaking, they don't plan on doing any work right now, and they say as much. But then, Logan and Chase show up on the scene, because while the girls are reading their magazines, they're really not too happy about it, specifically Logan, and he speaks up. He says, "What are you doing on our roof?" So now we know apparently we're on a rooftop. And, it's a back and forth because the girls are like, hey, our roof is, ish. So the girls don't want to be on their roof for, they're suntanning, and instead they came up here. And Logan is like, hey, you can't be here. This is for guys only. And Zoey steps up and she kind of goes back and forth with Logan. And then she asks Chase to kind of back her up, and he disagrees. He's like, well, actually, PCA used to be for guys only. And we're so glad that the girls are here, but we kind of want a space just for ourselves. Now, before I go any further, this plot structure, boys versus girls, has been a common theme in the show, even if you go all the way back to the first episode of season 1. Just saying, but hey, we're doing it again. But either way, the argument continues to go back and forth. Everybody's chiming in, and Logan tries to say that it's basic biology that boys can't just be boys when girls are around. They act differently. And, Chase is kind of on that train, but he doesn't really get down the biology part. At the end of the day, Lola, Nicole, Zoey, they all try to dig their heels in, but Zoey gets the most aggressive. She even folds her arms about it and says, we're going to go to the DA and talk to them because we think it's unfair that you want us to leave the roof. So, with all the back and forth, she leaves, Logan leaves, Nicole leaves, but the scene's not actually over, because Lola is still sitting on the roof doing her suntan thing, and she asks Chase to turn the music up on her boombox. Like, this is back when people actually had boomboxes to play music out loud. So he walks over to, I guess, what is the ledge of the roof, and he says, oh, this is a nice boombox, tries to press a button, and the whole thing just falls over the ledge, falls down, I guess, a few stories, and breaks. So this is supposed to be funny, because he looked back and he's like, hey, was it expensive? Because she's like, oh, I just got it. And, it's a nice boombox. Well, that's dead. And then we cut to a new scene. Because at this moment, remember, Zoey, Logan, Nicole, they all left. And they're talking to the DA, dorm advisor. And he basically sides after they kind of argue back and forth that, yes, if the boys want the roof to be for the boys only, and this is the boys' dorm, then the girls kind of have to respect that. So apparently, Zoe's attempt to tattletale on the boys didn't work. But she tries to dig her heels in, and she's like, well, if we can't go to their roof, then the boys can't hang in our lounge. And Nicole's not down with that. She's like, nah, bump that. The boys can still hang in our lounge. And, the DA, he leaves. Before that happens, Logan actually leaves, and he's pretty, rude. The way his character has been drawn up, he's more or less been like that in all the other episodes. And he even shouts out, ha, later losers, after he finds out that the girls are going to be, banned or, kicked off of the roof. Now, the most interesting part of this scene has to be the end of it, because Logan leaves the room and the DA leaves the room. And I presume where we were was the dorm advisor's room. So, like, he left his own room. But regardless, Zoey and Nicole are having a follow-up conversation, and it's specifically on the whole boys using the lounge thing. And Nicole tells Zoey that the lounge is like ice cream and boys are like her sprinkles, the sprinkles on the ice cream. So that's why she doesn't want the lounge to be a place where boys don't come. But Zoey says she's going to visit Dustin in the infirmary because, well, he's sick. And that's the next scene we get. But if you're new here, I want to say thank you for even making it this far into the video. I'm Ezra2K. If you really want to know the hidden messages behind nostalgic TV, then you are in the right place. And if anything that I say actually connects with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe. But if I don't, just let me know in the comment section, because I try to read them all. When we arrive at the infirmary, Dustin apparently has the chicken pox. And Zoey tells him that he can go back to his room, that everything will be fine because his roommate already had the chicken pox, so Dustin won't be contagious, to make him sick. But Dustin doesn't want to leave. And he says it because they have a new nurse, and the new nurse is apparently someone he is very attracted to. When I say attracted, I mean exactly the word that I suggested. Now, Dustin is in the lower school for the purposes of the boarding school, and the nurse, her name is Shannon, and when she walks in, it's pretty clear that she's aware that Dustin has taken a liking to her. So now we have an adult woman who is, supposedly an attractive nurse, and she's caring for Dustin. She brings him ice cream, and she's like, I thought you might like ice cream. But she's saying it kind of with like a baby talk voice. And he's like, you thought right. Like, again, still in this, baby talk, back and forth. So they're kind of leaning into this imagery. I'm not going to say a whole lot right now. Just going to drop that and keep it moving. The scene ends where, yes, we're going to see Dustin again, but not right now. But we move on to the girls' roof. Because now that they've been kicked off of the boys' roof, they go up to their own to try to do some sun tanning again. There's a whole lot of this sun tanning. Like, these kids don't actually go to class. And in this scene, they say that their roof smells like pee. So they're not having a good time. And in Zoey 101, like in their world, they always drink this thing called Blix. And I'm pretty sure you've noticed that the bottle that Blix comes in doesn't look like a traditional, soda bottle that you might drink out of. Resembles a whole lot more like cough syrup. But hey, just a random aside because it's in the scene. But yes, this entire scene exists for Zoey to have the bright idea that the girls need to teach the boys a lesson and prove to them that they are wrong. That guys and girls, there's really no difference between them. That the guys can act exactly the same as they do around the boys, as they do around the girls. And Lola and Nicole are like, well, how are we going to do that? And the right idea is we have to figure out how to be around the guys without them realizing that we're there. In this conversation, as well as many others, they make a joke about Nicole not being all that intelligent. Hey, that's important that we remember this is a part of her character. They basically tell her to be quiet and let Zoey do all the talking. And Zoey comes up with the idea to dress up one of them as a guy so that they can show that biology has nothing to do with it. See the language. And that the boys are just acting weird because they are stupid or what have you. And Lola actually likes the idea. She sees herself as an actress. That's part of her character. And she's like, hey, this would be the ultimate acting challenge. Now, Nicole does say that there are at least 4 problems with that. And it would be hair, face, and she uses the word boobs. And when Lola called her out and says, that's not 4 things, she's like, well, you have 2 boobs. I mean, that's the joke. It's in there. Moving forward. And before the scene ends, Nicole does question, Lola, do you really think you can pull this off? And she's like, this is going to be pretty simple because Chase is gullible and Logan is a moron. Hey, I'll come back to that part later. But that's the end of the scene. So immediately after this, they follow up on this, dress Lola up as a guy thing. Remember, this is where the episode is headed. And the way they go about it, we haven't seen Michael up until this specific moment in the plot. Zoey approaches him, tells him what the game is. We're going to make, Logan and Chase look foolish. Michael's on board with it. Like, hey, I'm, all for fun and games and practical jokes on my friends. But there's this issue where Zoey tells him, we're going to need your help. We need you to help us turn Lola into a believable guy. That's one piece. And the other is that Michael will have to leave the room so that Lola can move in as a temporary roommate. Logistically, that's very problematic. But either way, this is where they run with the plot. They talk Michael into the idea of leaving the room to go to the infirmary. And Zoey tries to sell him on the idea that it's going to be fun to go to the infirmary because Shannon is there. She actually takes a picture of Shannon and Dustin from the last scene where she was at the infirmary because Dustin wanted to take a picture with her and send it to everybody. That's the direct words. So once Michael realizes, oh, there's a attractive nurse that I can hang out with in the infirmary, by all means, I'm going to pretend that I'm coming down with a fever. And now that the stage has been set for the rest of this episode, the moment has come for Lola to transition. Notice my choice of words. So Michael comes over to, I guess, the girls' dorm. You have Lola in the room. You have Nicole, Zoey, and Michael. And they're just doing a whole bunch of stuff, like it's a whole montage, the way they used to do in shows like that, where she's trying on different clothes and different wigs and all this stuff to kind of make her into a quote-unquote believable boy. And when it's all done, they come to the conclusion like, wow, we did a great job. Nicole makes the joke that Steve looks so good now that I could almost go out and date you. And then Steve plays it back and said, hey, come here, for a kiss. Now, Nicole's not necessarily having it, but after this, she tells Michael to go to the infirmary. So he basically gets kicked out of the room. Like, thank you for your help. Now, goodbye. In the immediate next scene, we do see Michael on the way to the infirmary because Logan and they bring him to the infirmary. So apparently his friends are tricked into thinking that he's actually sick as well. And when they drop him off, Michael is excited because he's like, hey, where's the new nurse? And Shannon first comes out, but then they clarify that she does not work with the upper school kids, which is what Michael would classify it. And Michael had already talked about a woman named Nurse Crutcher prior to this scene. And the Nurse Crutcher comes out, who is a large and very domineering figure. That's the best language I could frame it. And she's, very aggressive with her language. So she's screaming and hollering at Michael and tells him, you lay down. And he's like, no, I don't want you. And she's like, lay down. And he's, super scared. And then he runs and jumps into bed. And it's basically supposed to be a precursor on what his stay in the infirmary is really going to feel like. Because he thought he was going to hang with, the cute nurse, Shannon. But she's just kicking it with Dustin. I mean, as far as we can tell, that's really what's happening. But while Michael is becoming a prisoner of the infirmary, we get one more scene where Lola is getting prepared to be Steve. Now Quinn has been involved. She has special glasses that she's going to put on Steve that have mini camera, or I think the term was a teeny camera, put into the glasses so that the girls can get kind of like a webcam feed sent back to them. And I guess it had like a receiver where, Lola, pretending to be Steve, can actually talk to the girls back and forth and they can kind of hear things in her ear so that, if she needs to, figure out what to say and doesn't know how to adjust it, she can get feedback. So now we've established that Zoey and Nicole are going to be primary sidekicks on this entire mission. And lastly, Quinn actually whips up a draft of a letter that is forged to be from the actual dean, like the dean of the school, Dean Rivers. And the letters is what's going to get Lola installed as Steve, the temporary roommate, who's stepping in for Michael, at least for the purposes of plot for these next few days. So they're going to give this letter to the DA, the dorm advisor. And apparently he's never going to follow up on anything or hear anything official. Just check the letter and we're just going to put a kid in a temporary dorm, which isn't really a thing as far as I know, but this is Nickelodeon and we need the plot to work. So now it's a moment of transition where Steve has to infiltrate into the boys' dorm. So Lola goes off representing as Steve and we see, webcam footage getting relayed back and, Steve is saying sup to everybody, more or less trying to, I guess, act hard in some form. But Steve almost gets thrown off because Steve sees some girls, and one of which had a very cute top, and Steve forgets that, Steve is what we're doing. So Lola starts to act like herself. It's like, oh, that's such a cute top. And then she has to play it down and kind of keep it moving. But yes, fast forward, get to the dean or the DA. The DA clears the letter. Michael is gone. Logan and Chase are like, all right, fine then. I guess it's fine. Okay, take the top bunk. And they're infiltrated, they're in. So the scene that ensues is one where Steve is trying to make small talk and said that Steve is from Chicago, go Tigers. And Logan and Chase are like, well, the Tigers are actually a sports team from Detroit. So what do you mean by that? And then Steve tries to play it off like, oh, this is Tigers at the zoo, because that's what Quinn says in the microphone. It's a bunch of randomness like that. But at the end of the day, it all gets moved over. And then we get a quick cut away from all of this, back to the infirmary, where Dustin and Shannon, remember, Shannon's the nurse, are playing games together, blowing bubbles, again, looking like, two young kids in some type of, puppy love scenario. I say it that way for a reason. And on the other end, you have Michael, who's actually getting into an ice bath. And Nurse Crutcher is pouring all the ice in there, and this is to quote-unquote bring down his fever. Obviously, he's shivering. He's like, but I don't have a fever. And Nurse Crutcher says, well, it must be working. And for the purposes of pacing, that scene lasts for only a few seconds, and the next thing we get is Logan waking up early in the morning, apparently 8 a.m. when the alarm goes off, because he is supposed to be playing water basketball. So that means we have Steve has made it through the night, is in this top bunk. Logan gets up in a frenzy and it's like, hey, come on, Chase, we got to go play water basketball. I'm not losing to these guys. And they need a third player to stand in for their team. So now they draft Steve and say, Steve, you got to play with us. Water basketball, we're going to go into a swimming pool and, play basketball. But you can kind of see the problem with this because Steve isn't really Steve. So now that, Steve puts on the glasses, Zoey and Nicole are freaking out like, oh, snap, Steve can't get in the water because, it'll expose that Steve isn't really Steve. Nicole doesn't fully get it. Quinn gets into the room, then they kind of shout at Nicole because more jokes around her just not being all that intelligent, and things move really quickly because the boys make it all the way to the swimming pool because they're just rushing. So they're like, okay, we'll change it to pool. Steve is there reluctantly because Logan actually threw some swim trunks to Steve and it hits Steve in the face. It's supposed to be comedy because it's really Lola. And ultimately it's like, hey, borrow my swim trunks, we're going to play. And while Steve is still trying to, dodge their way through the pool circumstance, because they're like, come on, man, you got to change. We got to do this. Logan, because he's, so aggressive at like, Steve, you got to go. We got to get ready for this game. Accidentally, Steve's glasses fall into the pool. So there goes the communication with Zoey, Quinn, and Nicole, as well as Quinn's teeny camera, which she basically makes it clear that she's very disappointed to lose. All that being said, the girls now have to come up with solutions in order to save Steve from embarrassment. They all go running out. Quinn says she has an idea. She says she's going to get Marvin. We're about to find out who Marvin is in a moment. And the next scene we get actually cuts back to the infirmary while all this is going down. It's just a quick shot of Michael with Nurse Crutcher, who's aggressively feeling up his neck, I guess, feeling his glands. And Nurse Crutcher says, I don't know what's wrong with you. I'm going to have to draw more blood, and takes up this huge needle. And then Michael's like, not about it. And after we see him fearful when he sees the huge needle, that scene ends. And we're right on back to the water situation. Because at this moment, the other boys, Chase and Logan, they're already, about to go play the game. Steve is still trying to figure out a way out of the circumstance. We see Zoey and Nicole run onto the scene. They ask, where is Quinn? When Quinn shows up, all of a sudden she takes out a red snake and says, Marvin, do your thing, and throws Marvin the snake into the water. And when that happens, all pandemonium breaks loose at the pool because a boy sees the snake, everybody's screaming, the lifeguard says everybody out of the water, and now you have essentially a stampede of people running around. And in the stampede, Steve is standing by the edge of the pool, and Steve gets knocked into the pool as somebody runs and, just flails their arms, at which point Steve finally gets exposed because Lola comes up out of the pool with some of the makeup and, the wig, all of that coming off. At this present moment, now that, Lola's been exposed, Chase says, I'm very confused. Logan is like, somebody start talking, and the girls start explaining what happened, and they were trying to prove a point. And immediately, when Chase is hearing them, he says, so you guys really want to, hang out on our roof? Like, that was his takeaway. And Nicole's like, no, we wanted to prove a point, and they continue going down that path. Pretty clear that, I guess, the girls made their point, that they were hanging out with Lola this entire time, thinking that Lola was Steve, that there's no biological reason why the boys can't behave the same or act the same when the girls are around. And after that, I guess the conclusion is that we're going to move past it and let the girls back onto the roof. Among other things, but yes. But we do get one more infirmary scene, because now Michael is trying to escape from the infirmary. Dustin is, happy he's sitting in the bed, but Michael is trying to sneak out because, Nurse Crutcher's been on him the entire time. And eventually, he almost gets to the door and then gets caught. And it's a whole confrontation where they realize, wait a minute, Michael, who was pretending to be sick this entire time, did get sick. He caught the chicken pox from Dustin. So now he's going to have to stay in the infirmary for an even longer stretch of time, but this time legitimately. And before all of this happening, we do get an interesting line from Nurse Crutcher, who, after shouting at Michael in the scheme of, some of the things going on in the plot, she looks at Shannon and says, my husband is in prison, which apparently is supposed to, explain why she's so mean and aggressive. But at the end of the day, this character is supposed to be a more masculine representation of a woman. I mean, no shade, just being honest. Which brings us now to the final images that they give us before the episode ends. Because first we have all the kids, more or less, hanging out on the roof again, and they're showing that they can coexist and have fun. Some people are, eating fruit and reading the magazines again and, sunbathing or whatever it is. Then they ask, hey, where's Quinn? At which point we get a quick cut to the pool where Quinn is lounging at the pool on like some type of flotation device, holding Marvin the snake. And she's like, oh, Marvin, you're so funny, or, whatever. Basically making it seem like she's on a date with Marvin. And then the scene ends. And, they play the music, Zoey 101. Yeah, yeah, you. I don't really know the rest of the lyrics. Just got to let it loose. I think that's what they say. Like, it's probably like the other part of the theme song that from the beginning that nobody really paid attention to on the back part. And there you have it. The Zoey 101 episode, Girls Will Be Boys. Now, obviously, if you just look at the title, it's pretty clear what they were aiming for. But this is still an era of television where Nickelodeon couldn't go all the way out on what they might want to say. There's a lot of imagery that, as far as I can tell, is included really just for the purpose of trying to push in a direction without explicitly saying it. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. This is an entire, 22-minute episode where it's all about a girl dressing up as a guy to prove there's no difference between the two. Now, interestingly enough, they do assume, like the characters, they're not ignorant. They don't act as if there really is no difference between the two. Like, hey, girls look different, so on and so forth. But when they say the word biology, they chose that one on purpose. And they also try to prove that we can overcome these differences quite literally. You put on a bodysuit, what have you, play off a few mannerisms, and there you have it. A girl is now a guy. Because I guess what they were trying to prove, like, it seems a little antithetical, that if you want to prove that boys and girls are the same, and in order to do it, you try to make a girl into a boy. If how you identify is what you are, that kind of offends the logic. I mean, I could be wrong, but, just let's play this out. Because if you really are a boy because you identify that way, then it does not prove the point about girls and boys being different, as much as it is that people can change how they identify. That being said, this is an image that's being presented to children, and Zoey 101, for the most part, was being aired to a demographic between 7 and 14 years old, like everybody in that net. So this is still pretty complicated to show this idea to the kids. And the real question is, were parents paying attention? But look at all the small moments within the plot. Some of the things I even left out, like Nicole listening to Steve's voice, like Lola pretending to be Steve, saying, oh, that's a really, attractive voice. Also, the jokes about Nicole, because Nicole is an archetype of a girl, and her character has always been boy crazy. So much so that when her friend, a girl, pretends to be a boy, she sometimes gets lost in it. Oh, you look attractive. Oh, your voice sounds attractive. Things like that. So again, this imagery is there. Just going to drop it, deal with it how you want to. Then you move on over to the whole Dustin and Nurse Shannon thing, where you have a child with an adult. And it's clear that the child is attracted to the adult. But what's worse is the adult seems to be fine with it. Like there's no clear break ever established between the adult and the child. Now, because it's a younger boy, and a woman, it's more or less perceived to be non-threatening. But what if we had just flipped this dynamic for the purpose of argument and put a little girl in the place of Dustin and a male nurse or a male doctor? You can already see where I'm going with this. That I think most people would have more clearly picked up on the problem with that representation. Then you have Nurse Crutcher, who, yes, the character is a woman, but they're obviously trying to portray this woman as hyper masculine and someone that Michael is quite literally afraid of, like actively trying to run away from and avoid. Like, again, a lot of this is comedy. I get it. But that image is there. So still trying to blur the line between what we understand a man to be and what a woman is. And then there is the clear explanation that when we look at the boys who are presented in the plot, and this isn't specific to just this episode, but let's just deal with what they gave us. You have Michael, who's willing to pretend to be sick to go to the infirmary, and then he's getting pushed around by the nurse, like literally pushed around to the point where it feels like he's in prison. So Michael always exists just for comedy as far as I can tell. They don't really give him much emphasis on much serious, airplay or, development. But either way, he's on the shelf. And then let's just take the quote that Lola gave us, where she says, Chase is gullible and Logan is a moron. This is the representation of what they think boys are. Because the real question is, what representation of a young man in this plot is actually portrayed with anything positive. I don't really see that. I mean, Chase is more or less a follower. Keep in mind, if you're watching Zoey 101, Logan is the leader of his friend group, and Logan's character represents toxic masculinity more than anything else. Now, that's a term that people kind of have to infuse a definition on. But for whoever was writing up the character, I'm pretty sure that what he says, some of his, jokes about women, his perspectives on them, women need to know their place. Remember, this is a consistent plot driver. Multiple episodes, more or less on and off, from season 1 on down, focus on the boy versus girl dynamic, especially in the first half of the show, season 1, season 2. Season 3 as well to a lesser degree. This is another one. And the point of this episode is that girls and boys are the same. So the same that girls can be boys. What we do with that is what we do with it. But watching it in the year 2025 doesn't hit the same, because it might have been fun and games when it first dropped. But if you understand what the culture has become, and the conversation back and forth and where people land on it, I'm not here to argue about where you stand, but I do believe that parents probably should know what their kids are watching, because it's really hard to have a conversation about something when you have no idea what's going on. If you actually made it all the way to the end of this video, I do have to admit that thank you doesn't do it justice anymore, because you are a real one. And if you want more from me beyond this, just realize there ain't no shame in my game. This is a new channel, so it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe.